Hi, welcome to my talk. Today I'm going to talk about syntactic dependency length shaped by strategic memory allocation. Human language processing requires an efficient use of our bounded working memory. One of the prominent examples at the syntactic level is the processing of nonlocal syntactic dependencies. Here's an example. In this sentence, there's a nonlocal dependency relation between the subject and the main verb that needs to be established during real-time processing. That is, at the main verb, language users need to retrieve the content of the head noun at the subject position. However, this retrieval process sometimes can be quite challenging. Intervening materials between the matrix subject and the main verb can create memory interference that may distract memory retrieval. And you can imagine the retrieval can be increasingly difficult when there are more and more intervening materials. This limitation of working memory capacity exerts an evolutionary pressure on the structure of language. Therefore, the dependency locality principle holds that human language should be structured in a way that puts the subparts of a dependency closer to each other. And this could help us to reduce the amount of non-local retrieval and to avoid memory interference. Based on this basic principle of dependency locality, a natural next step is to ask how far this efficiency-based account of language structure can go if we have a more and more detailed and realistic characterization of the nature and constraints of working memory. In the current study, we propose a strategic allocation of working memory as a constraint, and we are going to discuss how this strategic memory allocation can modulate the dependency locality principle. Specifically, we propose that novel and unpredictable information is prioritized for working memory resources. This could mean that, first, during memory encoding, we can encode a more detailed semantic or syntactic feature for novel information. Second, this could also mean that, after being encoded, novel information can be maintained in an enhanced way in working memory. The prediction of this strategic memory allocation is that, although it is more difficult to encode linguistic units with novel and unexpected information when they are first encountered, they may actually receive more robust memory representation against interference in the noisy communicative context. In the current study, we are going to examine this strategic memory allocation in the empirical domain of dependency locality. Here's an illustration of how strategic memory allocation may influence dependency locality. In this example, we have a noun phrase, the evil monster. The head noun of this noun phrase is relatively predictable since an evil monster is a prototypical monster. Based on our hypothesis of strategic memory allocation, this evil monster should be less prioritized for working memory compared to a cute monster, which is a less typical type of monster and less predictable. The consequence of this contrast is that the cute monster should receive a more robust and enhanced memory representation compared to the evil monster. Therefore, when these noun phrases appear in non-local dependencies, the cute monster should be able to tolerate a longer dependency length. Based on this reasoning, we predict that the dependency length should positively correlate with the informativity of the antecedent in general. In the current work, we're going to take an information theoretic perspective of informativity. That is, we approximate informativity through the concept of surprisal, which is negative log probability of a word given its preceding context. We examine this correlation through corpus analysis, and here is a simple demonstration of how we did this. First, what we need is a dependency corpus, which annotates all the dependency relations of a sentence. For this purpose, we used a corpora from universal dependencies, or UD. And this is an example of how a transitive sentence is annotated. Here, the corpus annotates a subject-verb relation between she and left, an object-verb relation between left and note, a determiner relation between note and the determiner. Second, we need to get the surprisal for the antecedents of each dependency. In this work, we got the surprisal measure from GPT-3 language model. In the end, we need to measure the dependency length, which is the distance between the antecedent and the other side of the dependency where memory retrieval takes place. So here, the length of the subject relation is 0 because there is no intervening word between she and the main verb. And the length of the object relation is 1, since there is one word in between. With all this information, we are now able to examine the relationship between the dependency length and the antecedent surprisal. Here's the summary of the UD corpora we used. We looked into 11 languages. There are 2 types of corpus. One is organized document by document, and the other consists of isolated sentences. And this might influence the estimation of surprisal, since each word may have a more enriched preceding context if the corpus is document by document. Also, since the Russian corpus is too big, we randomly sampled 300 documents from the Russian corpus, which is roughly half the size of the corpus. This is how we pre-process the data. Given the original corpus, we first got the surprisal for each word given its preceding context that is maximally available. Then, we extracted sentences that are longer than 5 words, since sentences that are too short might not have enough room for the dependency length to vary in the first place. We then remove tokens that are punctuations, and we also remove tokens whose surprisal was larger than 20 bits. We then extracted all the dependencies from each sentence, and this gives us the first dataset, which I will refer to the full dataset. In addition to the effect in general across all the dependency types, we also want to take a closer look at the effect for dependencies that include core arguments of the sentence. So, we further selected dependencies whose dependents are annotated as N subject or C subject, and this gives us the second dataset, which only includes subject relations. We also selected dependencies whose dependents are annotated as object, indirect object, CCOM, or XCOM, and this gives another dataset that only includes object relations. After this pre-processing, we still got a reasonable sample size for all the languages. We implemented 2 ways to measure the dependency length. The first measure is quite intuitive, which is the number of intervening words between the subparts of a dependencies. The second measure is the sum of surprisal for all the intervening words. Presumably, linguistic units with different informativity does not induce memory interference to the same extent. For instance, the definite article here in this example sentence might elicit relatively small interference, since it is not very informative compared to a content word like tower. However, for the first measure with word counts, it treats all the words in the same way. And we hope the second information theoretic measure of dependency length can capture this variability. Here's the result on the full dataset, with dependency length measured as word counts. A visual inspection shows that for most of the languages, there is a positive correlation between dependency length and antecedent surprisal. In order to know whether this effect is statistically meaningful, we ran linear mixed effect models on dependency length for each language. The critical fixed effect is antecedent surprisal, and we include random slope and random intercept by dependency type. We also include 3 control variables. The first one is the sentence position in the text, if the corpus is document by document. The second one is the sentence length as word counts. And the last control variable is the position of the antecedent in the sentence. Here's the result of the statistical tests. As shown in the plot here, there's a significant positive effect of antecedent surprisal on dependency length for Danish, English, German, Italian, and Spanish. The effect for Korean is negative, which is not in the expected direction, and the effect for other languages did not reach significance. In terms of the dependency length at surprisal, the result is the same, except that now the antecedent surprisal effect for Amharic is significant. As mentioned earlier, we also looked into the effect for subject relations. Since the dataset here only includes subject relations, we didn't include the random effects by dependency type. And here's the result with dependency length as word counts. As shown in the plot, there is a significant positive effect of antecedent surprisal on dependency length for most of the languages, namely Amharic, Danish, English, Italian, Mandarin, Russian, and Spanish. For German and Turkish, however, the effect is in the opposite direction to our prediction, and the effect for Japanese and Korean is not significant. The result for dependency length at surprisal shows a similar pattern, except that the effect for Amharic is now insignificant, and the unexpected negative effect for Turkish in the previous slide now becomes insignificant. For object relations, surprisingly, when we measured the dependency length as word counts, we didn't find any evidence for a positive correlation between dependency length and antecedent surprisal. If we measure the dependency length at surprisal, although there are some evidence for a positive antecedent surprisal effect, it only exists in less than half of the languages in our analysis. So, here's the summary of our results. In general, we find evidence for a positive effect of antecedent surprisal on dependency length. A closer look at the dependency relations that include the core arguments in the sentence shows that, first, for dependencies with subject relations, this positive relation consistently holds for most of the languages in our analysis. However, for object relations, the evidence for this positive relation is not that clear. In the end, we acknowledge there are two main limitations of the current study. First, our analysis highly relies on the annotation quality of the corpora we used, and is vulnerable to the potential inaccuracies in the corpus annotation, especially for dependencies whose identity is ambiguous and controversial. Second, the estimation accuracy of surprisal from language model highly depends on the size of the training data. And this is not really an issue for languages like English, but it could be problematic if we want to extend our analysis to other understudied languages that could be actually interesting from a typological perspective. Here are some key takeaways from the current study. First, we find empirical support for a positive relation between the length of a dependency and the surprisal of its antecedent. In terms of the dependency locality principle, this means that although there is a general pressure to minimize dependency length because of the working memory constraint, this pressure can be relaxed when the antecedent of the dependency carries novel and unexpected information. In terms of the strategic memory allocation, our results support this individual level processing strategy such that unexpected linguistic units are prioritized for working memory resources, resulting in more robust memory representation against interference. Okay, that's all I have for today. Thanks for your listening.